Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's super exciting to see so many of you here. I saw my seat just disappeared here, so that's great. So my name is Eva Hakansson. I arrived in Auckland in January. I'm teaching engineering for our first-year students at University of Auckland. And I'm teaching engineering design, so basically to design things, computer-aided design, CAD, and engineering drawing. Engineering drawing is probably not people's most popular topic, but I'm trying to make it fun. And I think CAD is magic. So you can create things in your computer, and then you can, for example, print them out on a 3D printer. And that gives you power to make pretty much anything you want. And I will show some applications of that tonight. I use engineering, I live and breathe engineering. I do engineering in my spare time. That's really nerdy, but it's a lot of fun. And I don't only build motorcycles. I will show you, that's my motorcycle, which I will talk about today. I also use engineering to do other fun things. Like I wanted a designer handbag, wouldn't want to spend $5,000 on a Chanel handbag, so I designed my own in CAD and 3D printed it. And of course, being an innovator and wanting to improve everything all the time, I was annoyed I couldn't find my stuff in my bag. So of course I installed lights. So I can always find my stuff in my bag. So that's what engineers do. I also show my students that engineering doesn't have to be just machinery or kind of boring, oily things. You learn CAD, you learn engineering design, you can do anything you want, like platform shoes. If you're 5'2" like me, you want to be taller at times, I designed, 3D printed my own shoes. But that's not really what I'm going to talk about today. So I joined University of Auckland in January. Before that, I spent 10 years in Colorado in the US and 27 years before that in Sweden. So that's how I ended up on the opposite side of the planet. This is as far as I can possibly get from my hometown, and that was the selling point. So I told you I do engineering in my spare time. I have a pretty cool hobby. So I designed and built most of the world's fastest electric motorcycle. It's the one you see in the picture. Yes, it is indeed a motorcycle. It's officially the world's fastest electric motorcycle. It's a motorcycle because it has 3 wheels, and anything less than 4 wheels is, under international competition rules, a motorcycle. But to get a feeling for what this one really looks like, I will send it around. It's a 3D printed scale model. So this motorcycle also made me, as you already heard, the world's fastest female rider on or actually in a motorcycle, because this is a motorcycle that you sit inside. Looks like that. Sorry, if you're more than 5'2", you can't fit. So that's kind of the cutoff to be on the rider list. So I built most of this myself with help from family and friends in a backyard garage in Colorado. It was my hobby project during my engineering school. You know, as an engineering student, you have so much time and money to spare, so you need a solid hobby project. Yeah, that's of course a joke. You have no life outside engineering school. But if you squeeze in an hour of work between your physics assignments and your math homework, and you do that every day for 8 years, you can actually end up with something totally amazing. So that's what I did. So most of this was built in my backyard garage, as people sometimes compare me with Burt Munro. I kind of feel a bit embarrassed about that, because I will never be as cool as Burt Munro. But I built the red Streamliner motorcycle in my garage so I can see the comparison, and I definitely aspire to be a true Kiwi one day. So that's what I'm hoping I can stay here long enough that I can become a true Kiwi. So here are a few pictures from the building of the Kilojoule, which is the name of the motorcycle, if that wasn't clear. That's my first test ride. Machining away, lots of machining. I love to build stuff. I always build stuff. Wirings is meters and meters and meters of wiring. There it looks a little bit more than what it does now. Welding is my superpower. I love the fact that I can fuse metal with my hands. And that's the backyard garage. That's the headquarters where about 99% of it was built. So I'm claiming this is the world's fastest electric motorcycle. That's kind of pretty specific in what this is. And to put this in a perspective, how fast is the fastest? So if we're looking at the scale from about 100 to about 1600 kilometers per hour, I am somewhere there. That happens to be pretty much the same place as the world's fastest production car. Your normal family car will be there, maybe pushing 200 if you have been splurging, and maybe much less if you didn't splurge on your car. About 100 years ago, the world's fastest car actually was electric and did 100 kilometers per hour, but more like 118 years ago, but roughly. That is quite slow compared to the world's fastest electric car these days, built by Ohio State University. Definitely a record I want to take away. They have held that record for many years, way too many years. But that is still slow if you compare it to the world's fastest wheel-driven car, which is currently at 745 kilometers per hour. That's a bit better than the world's fastest motorcycle at 640. That is actually my next goal, to take that overall motorcycle record. These are still slow if you compare to the very fastest ones, which are actually supersonic. So the world's fastest car is jet-driven, and it has broken the sound barrier. But that will be pale compared to the latest contender, the Bloodhound SSC, built in the UK, which is aiming for 1,600 kilometers per hour. They use a rocket and a jet engine to reach that speed. So those supersonic speeds are not quite possible with today's technology for electric drive, but all these other records all the way through the fastest wheel-driven is definitely possible with today's technology. It's just that someone has to do it. So this is all fun. It's all amazing engineering. Gearheads love this. We all love going fast. But why do it? Why do I do it? Well, it's fun with engineering, but that's not the main purpose. I have another purpose of what I do, and this is really where my passion is, why I love engineering, is because we can do good things. Engineering is the application of science for the benefit of mankind. We need to get places without polluting, destroying, and electric transportation really is the way to get around. I drive a Nissan Leaf, I love it, I commute back and forth from North Shore to Auckland Central. I buy carbon-free electricity, and it's just great. It's comfortable and everything. If I had a little bit more of a budget, I would have a Tesla that drove itself, but these days I still have to drive. So electric mobility is here to stay. It's really the way to go. We see an exponential growth of electric cars here in Auckland, and you combine that with, for example, your own solar panels. This is my house in Colorado, which I still own, and tenants are now enjoying the carbon-free and free electricity from the panels. That is a perfect match. You can actually drive a car for free if you just do an investment of solar power and the car, and all you have to pay is regio and insurance. But despite this is a recent survey. These are US consumers. Maybe that explains it. I'm an American citizen, so I can make fun of Americans. Maybe the Kiwis are much more informed. But this recent survey is scary. 60% of consumers said they didn't know you could buy an electric car. It doesn't matter how well I teach these engineering students, how amazing job we do in making cars, if consumers don't know we can buy them. If no one buys them, they won't make any difference. People will still drive their gas guzzlers. So this really confirms what I've been doing for the last 10 years is really the right thing. So for the last approximately 10 years, Kilojoule has been 8 years in the making, but it was a period before that, before we really put the saw to the steel and got things done. My husband, Bill, who isn't here today because he is in Denver, Colorado right now, packing up the Kilojoule Streamliner into a container to be shipped here. So it will be here hopefully in a month if everything goes well. And then we will race it in Australia in March. But we decided about 10 years ago, we needed to get the gearheads that love cars, but maybe don't care so much about the environment, to be interested in electric vehicles. And we realized if we build something that's insanely fast, that will give headlines and that will get people interested in electric vehicles, and maybe they will buy them, and then it will actually make a difference. This was way before Tesla really did that on a commercial scale, so you have to put it a little bit in perspective. These days, Tesla is doing a lot of that, and all the other car manufacturers are also on the trend. But I thought, let's build something insanely fast, and then exploit what Mother Nature has given me. Let's make something that's sexy. And I came up with my own term for it. I call it eco-activism in disguise. So what I am doing is no different than a Greenpeace activist that is boarding a whale hunting vessel or climbing a power plant with a giant banner. It's just I didn't like the prospect of being arrested, and I wanted to do engineering. So this is my way of doing eco-activism. And at 434 kilometers per hour, you do get even the most hardcore petrol heads interested. So that's kind of why I do what I do. And I try to weave this into my teaching as well. Teaching is, of course, a way of funding expensive hobbies. But I also see that that was a perfect match for me because I could get my passion into engineering and using engineering in a good way into our new engineering students and future engineers. So let's see what it looks like actually running 4 records at the Bonneville Salt Flats. I've been running at Bonneville Salt Flats every year for the last 8 years. Today, or this year, actually this week is the race. It's the first time in 8 years I'm not there, but I'm super excited to go to Australia, which has even a better salt flats than the US in March. So let's take a look at, it's about a 1.5 minute video, pretty much summarizing the last 8 years. So you may think building an electric motorcycle is something that's really, really complicated. Well, in reality, on the conceptual level, this is just a giant cordless drill with wheels. It's that simple. And that's what gave my husband Bill and me a competitive edge that we could make a progress on a very, very tiny budget. We built this whole thing with some in-kind sponsors for expensive parts, but out of pocket on a regular government engineer's salary. And that's because the electric drivetrain is so simple and it just works really great. But that's a conceptual level. To all the nitty-gritty little details, that's where you actually have to take an engineering degree at the University of Auckland, for example, to understand how to actually optimize all these little subsystems and get this all to work together. So I will show two kind of technical systems or 2 components in this speech. So I will dig in a little bit into where ingenuity and at least that's what I want to believe it is, and how being a little bit clever, using engineering to do things on a real budget, because that's what I'm about, is racing on a budget. But if you want to know all these technical details, after the speech there are some postcards. They're occupying my chair up there. This picture on the screen is on the back side. There are 2 fronts, same back side. That has all the technical details if you're interested. So, and how do you make a giant electric cordless drill faster? Well, you can go two ways. You can add horsepower. Horsepower basically always make you faster because you have to push this vehicle through the air. And the depressing fact is if you want to go twice as fast, that doesn't take twice as much horsepower. It takes 8 times as much horsepower. It's a cube law. So going from 200 to 400 kilometers per hour will take you 8 times the horsepower. So you can add horsepower. Well, I couldn't fit anymore, really. Couldn't really fit the bigger battery. Also didn't really have the budget for it. So I had to pick another route to go faster. And that is you can decrease the air resistance because speed racing is all about air resistance. You want to make it as very small as possible, hold through the air, and you want the vehicle to be super slick. Pretty much the same as America's Cup boats. They go through water, and you want to have as low air resistance or hydro resistance as possible. So looking at this vehicle, it's pretty slick, but that sidecar platform hanging out there, which has to have a specific size in the rules, is to hold a theoretical passenger. It also holds 62 kilograms of lead ballast inside it to simulate a passenger. That is not really a penalty. It's needed for stability. But you don't need an engineering degree to look at that and say, that's pretty crappy from an aerodynamic perspective. And yes, it is, but it worked. It was a last-minute solution years ago. It's worked for years, but it was time to do something about it. So in order to swish through the air, I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the story with my next slide, but we used 3D printing to make a new skin for this sidecar. So if you lift that top plate, checkerboard is what you call it here, checker plate, diamond plate is what the Americans call it, you see this ugly design, which I call the Christmas gift sidecar. It's red sheet metal, aluminum sheet metal. I have to get my accent correct. I'm working on that one. Just wrapped up, taped down, and then screwed right through. And it worked, but it wasn't pretty. So something had to be done. So Bill, my husband, he built an airplane when I met him 10 years ago. So he still had all the tools, all the skills. So he built this beautiful skin riveted together with ribs on the inside. He spent probably every evening for 3 months building this super slick design. And it was absolutely gorgeous. We took it out to Bonneville. And the conclusion was, it was awesome from an aerodynamic perspective. It reduced the energy use with 33%. Can you imagine if your car from one day to another took 33% less petrol? That was the big change this wrap did. The problem was it didn't have enough downforce. So the old platform had quite a bit of downforce. We didn't realize we needed that much. We just kind of lucked out in the design. It worked. But this one, despite swishing through the air, it was just slipping and sliding because I didn't get any grip with the rear wheel. So anything I did, it just wouldn't go over 400 kilometers per hour. And you know, who wants to be that slow? So, so we had to do something. It was kind of a disappointment. We went home, did get a new record, but just barely. So we needed a way of making several of these skins, and we need to tailor the shape. It's actually a wing. It's like an airplane wing, just upside down. So when it goes through the air, it causes downforce instead of lift. We needed a way of making several of these so we could tune in and put on the one that would suit that year. If it was a wet year, it would sloppy. If it was a dry year, it would have very good grip. Because you don't want to cause more downforce than you need, because it actually costs. Downforce doesn't come without the price. It does come with increased aerodynamic drag. And motorcycles are not allowed to have any movable surfaces, so you can't make it so you can move it. So 3D printing was the solution. We had a 3D printer, this one to be exact, which actually in that very photo is printing an early prototype for my handbag I showed. I just happened to have that photo, happened to be that way. But we bought this specific printer just because it's an open source, open hardware printer, means it's designed to be hacked. So we did that. We realized, we looked at this one, we can build a big one using the same print head, same control board, and we just have to rewrite the code a little bit to accept almost a cubic meter print volume. So we did. It was another winter project, and we built a giant 3D printer. So that took a few months to build that printer. It took 6 days to print that part. That's the Sidecar skin. 6 days may sound a long time, but you don't have to be there. You just start it, and then you check in on it once a day, make sure nothing has gone wrong. And then after 6 days, it's like having your own private elf building things for you in your garage. You have your part. So we made 2 different ones, one slightly more aggressive than the other one. That's one installed, one in my hand. The top lid is just a piece of sheet metal that holds it all together. And was also a perfect place to put names of all the people that helped in one way or another. Even if I have done about 80% of the blood, sweat, tears, and hours, there were lots of other people helping in little ways. Still important, but little ways, and they got their names on here. And here's a little commercial break saying you can get your name there if you want to, and I will show you on the last slide how you will do that. So, enough of commercial break. So there it is, Bonneville Salt Flats last year. That's the new Sidecar skin, the happy driver. Well, at least appear to be happy. So, how did it work? It worked wonderfully. It had the same low air resistance and just the right downforce. Unfortunately, this year gave us other troubles. There was an insanely hot year. It was over 42 degrees. We were melting away. Electronics were breaking. Cooling wasn't working well. So we only ran 393 kilometers per hour. So they didn't get any new record. But 3D printing is certainly here to stay. We got it all tuned in. And we will run the same Sidecar in Australia next year. The problem is, when you solve problems with engineering, another problem pops up. It's just the current problem you're working on is only preventing you to finding the next problem, which you will. And the next big problem I will run into if I'm successful in my ventures of going insanely fast, I will run into tire problems. And tires is the weakest link for all kinds of high-speed racing that's wheel-driven. So this is wheel-driven with transmitting power through the wheel as opposed to the jet cars that just have to use wheels to stay straight and stay on the ground. And literally where the rubber hits the road, that is what one of the big problems are. And also running flat for tires is incredibly dangerous. Not only will it damage when pieces of the tire comes flying, you can also put you flying and cause every kind of imaginable problem. So they say you shouldn't reinvent the wheel, but at times you come to a point in life when it's time to reinvent the wheel. And that's the reality with land speed racing right now. So this is a tire from the world's fastest piston-powered vehicle. They use up a set of tires per run. These are experimental tires developed for this car with an unknown amount of money. At 743 kilometers per hour, they use up a set of tires in 1 minute. They replace it, and then they make their return run. I don't have that budget. And also, these tires only come in car sizes, and I have a motorcycle. It has to be much smaller. I've had my own share of tire problems. This was my experience at 340 kilometers per hour, in the measured mile, full speed, full throttle, and suddenly I hear, what was that? And then I see a veil of smoke coming into my cockpit. It's like, holy mackerel, I'm on fire. So I roll off the throttle, pull the chute, and turn off the track, jump out, and there's nothing. Everything is just fine. And we couldn't find anything wrong with the bike. But it was the second to last day of racing where I realized we're going home because something is wrong. And not until I took all the bodywork off, I noticed there were pieces missing from my front tire. Still holding air, but it had gone so hot. This is a competition road racing tire, but my vehicle is much heavier. It got so hot it actually decomposed and turned into smoke. So it made these bubbles full of smoke, and some of them burst. And the rear tire was just about to do it, but it hadn't burst yet. It had like alien bubbles all around it. So this was a few years ago. I upgraded to what I could buy on my budget. The best tires are good for only 500 kilometers per hour. There are these ones, but my new bike I'm building is for 640 kilometers per hour, so I have to do something new. So I literally have to reinvent the wheel. So my idea was, and this is my official research project at the University of Auckland, they have a new staff research category, and I have a small grant to literally reinvent the wheel. So my idea was, I need a non-pneumatic tire. So pneumatic means air pumped. So a tire that isn't pumped up with air. Because if it isn't pumped up with air, it can't run flat. And run flat is a terrifying prospect of any kind of racing. But I still need a rubber grip because I need to grab the salt, which is actually kind of a crappy surface. It's like snow or a dirt road, so you need a really aggressive tire. But I couldn't just take rubber pieces and glue onto a metal wheel because they would fly off. At 600 kilometers per hour, it's 30,000 G force on anything sitting on the outside of this wheel. So anything that weighs a gram suddenly weighs 30 kilograms. And it's getting hot. So I needed a tire that didn't rely on adhesion, so it had to be mechanically held into place, this rubber grip. So we're kind of brainstorming some ideas. How can we do this? We came up with a good design. Of course, when you're working evenings and weekends, you always run out of time. Needed to find someone to machine me a solid aluminium wheel. Last minute, a friend stepped in. He happened to have a CNC machine in his garage, so he made a wheel for me. I went to an aluminium recycling place, bought 100 kilo, 50 kilo billets, and he machined that. Took him every evening for a week, and that's a real friend. Machines a wheel for you in the garage. So we did. That's Steve Sikora made that for it, and I was busy 3D printing a rubber grip. So I was sent around, because I didn't have a good picture of it, I was sent around. These are little rubber, look like cufflinks with a pull string. Here, send around a few. So I wanted a little rubber grip that sticks through this wheel and touches the surface. So I got this wheel, I drilled a gazillion holes. There's only 400, but it felt like a gazillion holes. It takes a long time to drill 400 holes by hand. And then I pulled through these little cufflinks with a pull handle, dipped them in soap first so they would slide right through and they got into place. Took me another half a day just to get those in. And then trimmed them off with a cutter. And there's Bill installing the wheel the day before we left for Bonneville, and there is Reinventing the Wheel. So I look at this, it's basically an inverted snow tire. Instead of being a rubber tire with a metal studs, this is a metal tire with rubber studs. And I had never seen anything like that, but I thought it should look promising. We put it on the Sidecar wheel for a couple of reasons. It's the skinniest wheel, so it was the easiest to make. It's the easiest to exchange, and also it's the least disaster if this wouldn't work out for some reason or would fly to pieces. I would basically just end up on my Sidecar and probably slide to a stop. So we brought it to Bonneville. Of course, everything is last minute when you're an amateur racer. It doesn't matter how much you plan ahead. You will always end up doing things the last evening. Unloaded it at Bonneville, brought it out on my first shakedown run. So first time of the year, I take it out. I need to be a bit easy. It's about 250 kilometers per hour. It's a nice, slow shakedown run. I ran this wheel, and it worked just fine. No big disasters. It was kind of interesting because it's solid. It doesn't give as good suspension as a rubber tire. There it is when we took off the cowling. So we had been so concerned by these rubber pieces flying out by the centrifugal force. But what we turned out was actually kind of the opposite. That was our least problem, was for them to fly out. It happened was, because it was last minute, I had some printing problems, and they came out a little bit smaller than they should have been. So when they wore, some of them got pushed inwards. But except for that, everything worked great. And that's an ugly picture. It's actually the ugliest spot, but just to show you the ugliest piece. But this is an easy fix from an engineering perspective. You just put a metal ring on the inside to make sure they can't be pushed inwards. So it worked great. There I am, quite exhausted, but happy with my wheel. I only used it for the first run and then put back my normal rubber tire. But it was so successful, it got me a research grant. And now I'm working on making a full set, 3 wheels for the race in Australia. So that will be awesome. So this is kind of what the research I'm doing. This is, most fantastic thing with this is that I actually get to work on my passion on work hours. And that has never happened before. So that's amazing. Of course, that means that in working in university is typically not a 40-hour week, but that's okay. Still, I still get to do it in work hours, so that's fun. So that's kind of where Kilojoule is now. It will be, next year, the plan is that it will be its last season. It's 8 years old now. That's very, very old for a racing vehicle. Formula One cars, for example, they run one season and get replaced. Something that runs for 8 years is quite long in racing, and everything starts to wear, corrode, and also you see all the mistakes you made, and you want to do something different. But the Kilojoule will race in Australia, and it will basically be a mule for testing out new stuff, such as the wheels. I also have a student team working on brake chute. Not totally reinventing the brake chutes, the brake parachutes that I used to slow down, but to make it better and softer hitting, and I will try that out as well. So what's next? Well, I've already revealed some of what is next. Of course, I have to build a new bike. You know, it's this, I get the question all the time, how fast do you want to go? And I just say faster. There's always faster. I showed you the scale. There are lots of records to be taken. There is no end in sight for doing this. So Green Envy is on the drawing board. It's right now a CAD model and a pile of steel tubing. It will have 1,000 horsepower. Its planned debut is in Australia 2020. That's 1.5 years from now. I'm already starting to panic because that's a very short amount of time to build a whole vehicle, particularly since most of this is still a hobby. But the funny thing is, I get the question frequently, what is the most difficult thing with building a racing vehicle? Looking at this, it's fairly sophisticated engineering, but nothing that's impossible at all. The hardest thing is actually to raise the funding. Maybe because I'm a good engineer, maybe it's because I'm a crappy business person, I don't know, or both. But that is actually the very hardest part. Right now is such a great opportunity, such a great window. There's almost no teams working in the electric regime for vehicles. It's just that raising the funding is really hard when you're electric because you're kind of weird. But I will figure that out anyway. So Green Envy, what are the goals for Green Envy? That's a computer rendering. No, it's not. It's actually a Kilojoule that's just painted green. It's not the true rendering. It is the Kilojoule in green. It currently has 2 logos because those are my main 2 big supporters. It's University of Auckland. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. And it's ChargeNet, the fast charging network, who makes sure we will get somewhere to actually build this vehicle. So those are the main supporters, but there are lots of room for other people. But enough about that. What's the goal? The goal is to be the fastest motorcycle in the world, period. So not fastest electric, but fastest overall. And that record is currently sitting at 605 kilometers per hour, completely possible to beat with electric power. And then the main purpose is, of course, to show that electric vehicles are not slow and boring, and that's the core purpose of anything I do. So that brings me, actually, 2 more slides. I am an open book, so everything I do, I show. Because if I didn't show what I'm doing, I'm kind of losing the whole purpose. The purpose is to promote electric vehicles, but also to inspire to STEM, to show that science is cool, and hoping to get kids to understand that studying engineering actually makes you a superhero, because you can invent and build things that have never existed before. So everything I do, I publish online. Science Envy is my a new umbrella I created for all my projects, because it's kind of, when the vehicles change names, I had to change websites, and I thought, I'm just going to pick one umbrella. This is where I post anything that has anything to do with electric vehicles or education. So that brings me to my last slides. I have one tiny commercial break, a ruthless self-promotion, but if you want to be involved, if you like to help make history, if you go there, you can get your name there. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Well done, Eva. So, that was an amazing presentation. Now we're going to open the floor up to questions for Eva. So the way that'll work is if you just chuck your hand up, I'll bring the microphone over to you. That way all the folks down the back can hear your question, and Eva will give us an answer. Sweet. So, does anyone have any questions?
They're just exhausted because I crammed through 46 slides in 35 minutes.
So take it easy on it, folks.
I promised you high speed, so in every sense. Okay, lots of questions. All the way in the back. I think a microphone is on the way. Good, and then I don't have to repeat your question.
Did you, at any stage of design, consider axing the sidecar to gain the obvious efficiencies with not having the third wheel in the sidecar?
So this is a great question. Did I ever think of axing the sidecar? No, it's actually quite the opposite. The Kilojoule was born as a two-wheeled solo motorcycle. Kind of similar to the world's fastest Indian, but these days you're not allowed to have that design anymore. You have to be completely enclosed in the roll cage. So that means that you're strapped in and you have no body English to work your motorcycle at all. All your input is just through the steering, and then you have, in my case, I had pneumatically actuated landing gear that came out with little wheels. The first year we were out at Bonneville, I realized either this motorcycle is not drivable, or I have no hope of driving it. We didn't know because you had to be so tiny to fit that no other driver would fit to take it for a run. I think it was a combination of both. It couldn't be driven, and I couldn't drive it even if it would have been drivable. But what I realized, being at Bonneville, I saw these Sidecar Streamliner motorcycles. I didn't even know such a thing existed. So Bill and I, we were quite naive when we started this project. We had never been to Bonneville. We had never built the Streamliner. We just decided one day, why don't we build the world's fastest electric motorcycle? And we started. And we didn't realize you could do a sidecar motorcycle. So we were just completely set for two wheels. And that just didn't work for me. So I saw the other Streamliners with sidecars and thought, that's what I'm going to do. I just went home, built the sidecar, put it on, call it my permanent training wheel, and I will never, ever take it off. And there's another reason for that. It gives stability and safety as a car. It gives behavior as a car, although the only thing is it's asymmetric, so it's kind of funky aerodynamically, but you can deal with that. But it turned out that what we didn't know at that point, we didn't realize at that point, that motorcycles are actually limited in speed by their traction. They cannot, doesn't matter if you have thousands of horsepower, if you can't transmit it to the ground because your wheel is just slipping, you can't go any faster. And horizontal airfoils are not allowed on Streamliner motorcycles, so you can't put a spoiler and push it down into the ground. So the sidecar platform is the only legal horizontal spoiler you can put on a motorcycle. And that combined with the stability and the safety, I firmly believe that a three-wheeled motorcycle can be faster than a two-wheeled because of those advantages. The only disadvantage you have is just what you mentioned. You have a penalty of an added drag. But if you do that, design it well, that added drag will be really small. So it's a very weird vehicle type. Asymmetric vehicles in general are very unusual. But it just turned out to be basically a loophole through the rule book where you can build a vehicle that has a very, very small frontal area, is allowed to run in motorcycle classes, but is philosophically a car with all its advantages. So that was a long answer to a short question, but it is a good question, and we just kind of lucked out stumbling onto all these benefits. So no, it's never coming off. The current so this is the question, is the current motorcycle record held by a solo motorcycle or a sidecar motorcycle? It's held by a solo motorcycle. But that record has stand for 8 years, and no one seems to be coming close to it because it's so difficult to transmit power and at the same time stay upright in a safe way.
Awesome, thank you. There was a question around the front here. Yeah.
So for the new vehicle, like compared to the kilojoules, what are the new designs that you are thinking that would bring it to the new frontiers, if you will?
Okay, so this is a great question. What's the difference? What are the new designs that will bring green envy, hopefully, to the overall motorcycle record? Well, first off, there are really two main things. I need more horsepower. So if we go from 400 something kilometers per hour up to 600 kilometers per hour, that is at least a doubling in horsepower, if not 3 times the horsepower I need for that. So I need to fit a bigger drivetrain. I'm shooting for, the target is actually 1 megawatt, which is 1,360 horsepower, but anything above 1,000 would be fine. My current, yeah, I'd be happy with 1,000. That's good enough. The current drivetrain is 400 horsepower. Electric, you just scale directly. You want twice as much horsepower. It will basically take twice as much space. So it needs to be about 1 meter longer to house more batteries and double the motors. So that's number one. Secondly, it needs to be better aerodynamically. We have to do better work, do the computational fluid dynamics, CFD, perhaps possibly some wind tunnel work, I don't know. The computer stuff these days is so good, you barely have to take it to wind tunnel if you have that CAD model. And then the thirdly is to just fix all the mistakes we realized we did. We weren't really good enough when we built the kilojoule. When you weld things, it tends to bend, because the metal is melted, and when it solidifies, it shrinks. So you weld something, you line everything up perfectly, you weld it, and when it cools, you just, it's like, now it's not straight anymore. And you have to keep really good discipline when you jig it up, when you weld here, you weld there, so it kind of bends back and compensates. We weren't really good at that. It's not really as straight as we wanted it. Kilojoule actually runs a little bit of a crab. It runs at an angle. It's only probably a degree or so. I can feel it, you can't see it. So all the little things to be more disciplined when we build it. And also big thing, we will build it in sections so we can actually take it apart and ship it in normal shipping crates. Because right now the kilojoule has to be shipped in a sea container, which is enormously expensive to get it anywhere. So break it down in pieces. Those would be kind of the main things.
Awesome. We have time for one more question.
Why still a tubular frame and not like carbon fiber monocoque?
So why a tube frame and not a carbon? I've been waiting for this all evening to fall off the stage. I finally did it on the last question. Why a tube frame instead of a carbon fiber monocoque? The answer is super simple. It's budget. So a steel frame of this size is maybe $2,000-3,000 in steel tubing, a welder and a bender, and we add up all this stuff, nuts and bolts, maybe it's $10,000 for a full frame that is 6 meters long. You try to make that in a carbon fiber monocoque, you would add at least a 0 or not 2 zeros onto that cost. And it was completely out of my range for budget, and also it was something I couldn't do myself. And the whole idea was to make this in my garage, that kind of Kiwi mentality that I'm aspiring to, and carbon fiber just wasn't part of the tools I had available. And also the reason, another reason not to go with carbon fiber is typically chosen where weight really matters a lot, like Formula 1 cars, our Formula SAE car at the university is carbon fiber monocoque. But at land speed racing, I want this downforce. So mass actually gives me downforce without causing aerodynamic drag. So I have to be careful not to be excessive in weight, because then I run in, for example, to Tyre Problems. But mass in itself is not a penalty. So things don't have to really be lightweight. My dad, who is an outstanding mechanical engineer, he built his own motorcycles in the 60s. He was in road racing. He was a road racing champion in his own motorcycles. Couldn't fit all that material in this presentation. He thinks my design is so heavy and so unsophisticated, he calls it a piece of farm equipment. But it works, it fills its function, and it works. And the heaviness is not a problem except for handling. So, yeah.
All right, awesome. Can we get a large round of applause for Eva, please?